Good afternoon, HubSpot Nation. Happy Friday. Here with Mr. Bill Barlas talking some CPQ. How you doing, man?
Good. Good afternoon, Chris. Things are going well. We're having a productive week here at Quick to Bid, and I'm
That's a good
excited for our
sign.
conversation today. I think we're going to cover
Yeah,
a little bit on data models for quoting professional services today. So,
yeah.
what an exciting, riveting conversation to bring in the weekend here.
I'm pretty sure everybody just needs to get used to the fact that you're going to be hearing about HubSpot quotes like every day this year. Like
Hmm.
probably like either you're seeing it on LinkedIn or we need to figure out how we're going to use cash flow like once they put it in,
Yeah,
right? And anything we can do to help educate, right? Because there's definitely right ways and wrong ways to do this. I think this has been a big struggle for like the CPQ space as an industry, like not always taking into account what visibility is needed in all the places and why can't we just have everybody log into all the systems and
yeah,
it'll be fine. Well,
absolutely.
that's what we know, that HubSpot's not gonna do it like that. So, we're here to help, hopefully with the understanding. In this case, last week we talked about how to think about human data versus back office data, more on like the product side of things, like when it's physical goods and right, things gotta ship out and right, which is I think is a lot more tangible in terms of, okay, yeah, we gotta figure out how the person is gonna see the tracking number, right? When the shipment happens. Um, but this week we want to talk about uh, professional services, which I love. I know we'll get to a similar place, I think, because at the end of the day, we're trying to set expectations up front, confirm expectations when you buy, and then tell you that we're meeting expectations as we deliver. Fair.
Yes,
All right.
absolutely.
So where would you start, like, in
Yep.
that figuring that
Let's
out?
uh let's talk about some key terminology first, and then we'll potentially talk about how to structure data for services. When we talk about services, what do we mean? Um, and then potentially start to get in a little bit maybe to our new object library conversation, time permitting.
Yeah. I mean, that's a good framing, like, there is a service object now in HubSpot, and, like, if you involve it sooner rather than later,
Hmm.
this becomes immensely easier because what we don't want you to do is clutter up your contact records, clutter up your deal records, try to
Yep,
do way too much on your line items that you just can't do,
doesn't work.
and you
Yep,
never will be able to do, sorry. Like,
yeah,
just calm down, right? You got this new
absolutely.
services object now that can help you. You don't have to wait until post sales,
Yeah,
right? You can start to bring like requirements and stuff like scoping, all the stuff that, usually lives outside of HubSpot. If we understand what we're asking and when we're asking it and the data that's required to support the answers, you can bring that
right.
stuff into HubSpot now.
Right. So let's uh let's talk about that human data. What does the customer need to see? So professional services, a professional service might be hiring a mall cop. It might be hiring a computer programmer. Maybe it's an electrician. These are all, hiring Bill. That's a professional service, right? That we offer. It's
It's like a community service sometimes.
a human being's time, right? That's what a professional service is. Um, Within professional services, there are a bunch of different ways that you can bill or charge for that person's time. You might charge for a project. either that has milestones or that's a single payment, right? You might charge for an hour of somebody's time, right? You might charge for an hour of somebody's time that has some materials also included. Maybe they have some expenses included, right? So there are a lot of different possibilities for how you charge your customer for the work. And that is extremely human data. It's something that's very important to a customer. How am I going to be charged for a deliverable that a human will provide to me? Um,
So what happens when like there's value-based pricing options as well, right?
yes, there are. Oh, mm,
Maybe it's a little less fun to figure out how you display that to the other human,
right.
but the ones who are really good at it, get paid more than everybody else. Just
Yeah,
just throwing that out there. Um,
absolutely.
but I think that's as I'm thinking through it, I think there's some probably unique ways. Again, if we start doing some of this inside of this system where all the rest of the data is, it's not as difficult as you might think.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, Continuing on with the value-based concept, I think that's something that we were going to hit on a little bit today. You have a person that's doing the work, right? A human being performing some amount of hours, um, and that's also extremely important to the back office. So, however you sell your project, whether it be milestone based, project based, hours based, in the background, typically there's a system called a PSA, which stands for Professional Services Automation, which is sort of like the ERP for services companies. So if you have a team or a pile of Bill Barlases that are all working on projects and you need to coordinate who's going to be available and with what skill set when, that's sort of what a PSA is for. So in a similar way that manufacturing operations, there are lead times, there are considerations that must be made around product manufacturing. Professional services works the same way, right? So, really, when we talk about it in the frame of CPQ, what we're talking about is both delivering to the customer the information that they need, right? But also allowing the operations team to be aware of what is in pipeline, what's about to close, when will it be closed, things like that, that are sort of CRM tasks. But where CPQ comes in so handy is that we can quote a project and tie it to those resources or those humans that are working on something and start to be able to forecast, okay, I'm going to need this skill set. Who has that skill set? When will they be available? Right? So, similar to the manufacturing area, professional services has, it's actually worse, um, far worse, far more complex, um, because understanding that somebody has a specific skill set, maybe they also have a relationship with that customer and they know the system. Maybe they need some additional training on a specific component, but they're ready for everything else, right? Maybe you booked everybody 6 months in advance and it's January and you're waiting to kick off some projects. Um,
Yeah.
that's and so it's both customer facing and internally facing important. Um, and so filling your CRM with this information I like doing it from a configurator because I think configurators are cool. But filling your CRM with this information about services that have been quoted, where they are in the pipeline, and then tying that to resources is important because it allows for your customer, your human, to see, but it also allows the back office to know what the pipeline looks like.
Yeah. And like as you described that, like it's always like and probably will continue to be a rocket science equation to me. Like when I hear about how elite agencies have to do this with
Mm-hmm.
like making sure people spend X% of their time as billable hours,
Mm-hmm.
right? Um, this is where I have no idea how they jump from that to value based like pricing. Is it just like a completely different infrastructure required, or how are you? Because I think as you started out, like what I'd like to maybe update the definition of services is that you're paying for somebody's either time, effort, or value like provided, right?
Correct.
And I've seen it in practice where this is where like I think the only way you get away with calling it customer serving is that it is infinitely easier to understand what you're paying for, like, and what you're gonna get when you can break it down into hourly,
Yes.
right? Everything beyond that, there's just so many intangibles, and that's where it's like we move from like managed services to like partnerships and say like, yes, we're in it together, and we know that these are the goals, and let's just meet the goals, and we'll bill honestly, and you'll pay honestly,
Mhm.
right? So perfect world, not the world we might be talking about here, but like as you manage that, like in your organization, how do you think about it?
Yeah. So the first thing I want to say is that when you talk about managed services or expert services, and we do a fair bit of that at Quick to Bid for customers. Um, a lot of the work that we do is almost as a staff augmentation. So it's not so much that a company couldn't learn internally how to handle some of the things that we do. What we do is we partner with them, and we can be an expert resource for a set period of time. So rather than it's I think sometimes it's a cost thing. So, maybe having an expert from Quick to Bid on staff for 10 or 20 hours a month, we're efficient, we know the tools that we're working on. Um, maybe you only need that for a quarter or two. It's Our goal is not to tie ourselves to an organization indefinitely for managed service. Our goal is to augment a team that may not have all of the staff that they need at a time. Um, so that's sort of, and in that case, an hourly model makes a lot of sense a lot of the time.
Right.
We go in and we help out, right? Um,
So how do you bring that like understanding into like the CPQ part of the
mhm.
process? Because I would imagine you have to consider what it looks like beyond closed one sometimes in order to get the configuration right. Yeah.
Yeah. So there are a few different data models for different types of selling of services. So if you're selling milestones, you're providing value at a price. The way that you can do that, and we are not really at a point yet at Quick to Bid where we need this to exist, but larger companies often are. You have a set of service offerings that you know that you can provide to a customer. So let's say that it's setting up, I don't know, running light fixtures, right? And you have to pay an electrician to do it, right? We're going to install 100 light fixtures in at your building. We know through long experience how much time that's going to take. So the service is an installed light fixture. The milestone is 100 installed light fixtures. That service has an SKU associated with it. And also, potentially, if you, and sometimes this is possible, a predefined set of language that can go into a statement of work for performing that service. And then in the background, and this is where it gets sort of into the PSA, you can associate the SKU for the service to the SKU for a resource. Does that make sense? So if you've got electrician one and their cost is $40 an hour, right? And you have done enough light fixture installations to know that it's 3 hours of time, right? You take your cost, do your markup, and then make your pricing either value based or as a simple markup on your cost for that resource. And so at that point, the resource isn't as important to the customer because they're receiving a quote for value provided at a milestone. See what I mean?
Yep.
Whereas when you're selling hours of time in a time and materials manner, maybe you still have an understanding of what the team will do, right? But you're estimating the level of effort that it will take, and you're providing a rate card with different resource levels and what their pricing is to do work. See what I mean? So how do I say this? Sometimes it's easier for a company to buy hours than it is to buy value, right? So, it's
Well,
more
always,
about
pretty
what the
sure.
customer, what they want, right?
Yeah.
Um,
And what like that's where like especially when you got to get like CFOs involved,
mhm.
like 10 hours equals this much money is way easier to get approved a lot of
Correct,
times, right?
correct.
Even
Yeah,
if this other plan might also take 10 hours, but we're calling it like, 5x growth
yes.
or something like that, right?
5x light fixtures installed, right? That is
Yeah.
it's a, oh, you actually did another jump. 5x the amount of light that you had before.
Yeah.
I see.
Yeah.
Yep.
No, I think that's fair. And I think we'll end up doing a part two of this conversation because what I would love to dive into, and I'm starting to understand, we've got to, at least it's in my, like, I would love to help clients, like this gotcha moment of it wasn't in the scope,
Hmm.
right? Like we hear about it all the time and it can be devastatingly expensive. And I get it when it's tied to like human capital, basically,
Yes.
right? If we didn't plan for it, like you might be lucky if that like skill is even available, like for the
Yes.
next 6 months, right? Um, so like, is that so? What I'm thinking out loud is that because it is really important to find these standardized languages that if you put in this, then it means this, and we have these 10 hours available. right? Since it's important to drive in that direction
Hmm.
for the value exchange to happen effectively, that kind of forces a lack of flexibility in terms of this is why it's so important as a user to say like, is there no customization like anywhere in the scope,
Right.
right? It's not that there can't be,
Yep.
right? But just there there's not going to be for these reasons generally. Like we
Yeah.
got to find a way to get to the black and white understanding of what we're paying for and what's expected to be delivered. Yeah.
Yes. Well, and the way I always like to think about it is we're talking about quoting effectively waterfall project delivery, right? And as a buyer of services, what I would be looking for is the smallest amount of waterfall that I could get while still meeting my minimum viable outcome. And then I would probably actually, I know there's some back and forth about managed services, but what I would probably do and hope from my partner is that I could then start to purchase time and plan it into more of a sprint model where we're able to iterate and choose where we go next. Especially, if you're buying consultative services for something like HubSpot, like Excite CPQ, you know, you plan this huge project out, you go and deliver this huge project. Is it really what was needed? Right. But what I find very difficult as a service provider is starting out in sprints. You really need that first bit done, that first bit of value, whether you bought it on value based, bought it on hours, however you purchased that outcome. I find it very difficult to deliver a project with sprints that is, or with an iterative approach, for the first bit. Does that make sense? Like,
Yeah. Well, I think anything like, so what comes to mind is anything with time based milestones.
mm-hmm,
Like if you haven't worked together,
mm-hmm,
like you got to find a way to confirm that, like you're saying. And then if you're taking a project or hourly based, like one company might go through those 10 hours in a week,
mm-hmm,
others might take 10 weeks.
yeah,
And it's 100% out of your control because they're their own team. They've got stuff going on. They have it prioritized differently, all these things.
yeah,
Um, so yeah, I'm with you there. That's where we get into, the other conversation that we'll almost certainly have is like scoping.
mm-hmm,
Like when does it happen? People like doing it for free. Some people like
mm-hmm,
waiting until the customer pays. Sometimes there's a high level done first. And
yeah,
all of this goes into really like netting out all the details, right? While understanding like how are we going to work together? Like,
yeah.
is this a fit? Right.
And the model I was describing with a service related to a resource, where that really becomes handy, especially if you've got a CPQ involved, is your project-based quoting. So you can say, in every project, I'm going to include a scoping service always, right?
Hmm.
And then add all of your other services in, and now you have a project, and ahead of time, organizationally, we've decided we're going to do it this way, right? So that's yeah, and I mean, anyway, quite a bit to unpack here. I
Yeah.
wanted to start the conversation about it.
Well, thank you. It's definitely a deep one, and we know that the ecosystem can use some assistance in understanding it. And I think because once you do, you'll be taking full advantage of some tools that already exist, honestly, in
Mhm.
HubSpot. But what's to come, what Happly's already doing, like there's lots of tools
Mhm.
available to do this much more effectively than we're doing it
Agreed.
right now. So, uh, if you want to share what you'd like to hear next, or if you have questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. Um, Thanks so much, Bill.
Thank you.
Have an awesome weekend.
You as well. Thank you.
All righty.